House Bill 156 by Representative Wilder, Title 23, Employment of Minors, to repeal provisional law relative to recreation meal periods for minors.
Roper Wilder on your bill.
Good evening, members. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Who would have thunk that simply trying to give a 16 and a 17-year-old their entire paycheck by allowing them to choose to stay on the clock would turn into such a crazy media storm? There's been an interesting media narrative filled with a bunch of word drama, misinformation, and probably disingenuous at best. So here's what I'd like to do today. I'd like to cover a few facts, F-A-C-T-S, about this particular repeal attempt and what this bill is aiming to do. So first and foremost, the narrative of Republicans want to establish labor camps and remove lunch breaks from minors, not a fact. And I was flattered yesterday when First Lady Hillary Clinton decided to chime in and want to compare us to Charles Dickens novels and villains and all this. That's 1838. What failed to mention was the fact that Louisiana Republicans are trying to vote to end mandated lunch breaks for child workers. The fact of the matter is, there's a mandate that says you have to sit down for 30 minutes off the clock and you can't get paid for that time. So let's talk about 16 and 17-year-olds as an employee. If anybody wants to, before the questions are asked, we can go to section 23-161 and talk about all the prohibited employments for minors. And yes, you can't work in a coal mine. Let's be clear. You can't work in a quarry. You can't work in a stone cutting or polishing plant. You can't work in a manufacturing plant with explosives, iron or steel manufacturing plants. You can't work in a sawmill, a stock mill. You can't work in a logging operations. Sorry, Jack. You can't work anywhere around machinery that uses cold rolling of heavy metals, shearing, stamping. Can't work in a freight elevator. Can't work in spray painting occupations, poisonous dyes. But you can work in a bar if you're a musician, as long as your parent or legal guardian okays that. So where the narrative has gone, the law already covers. So let's just be clear, number one. Number two, that means the list of where a 16 or 17-year-old can work is limited to probably retail establishments, fast food, and maybe the bowling alley. That's about all that's left on the list. So another fact, all businesses that I've called and spoken to, all, A-L-L, 100% of the people who I've called, and then this past Sunday, I actually went on a field trip and I visited about a dozen businesses personally. My Life 360 app will show anybody where I went. Started at Taco Bell. Every single person that I asked said they hate this law. They don't like the mandate. I was asked in committee, where is the outcry among the minors? Well, I've spoken to every page in this building today. Maybe we should just ask them, because every page working in this building right now that I spoke to is either 18 or 19, and everyone who I've spoken to told me straight up, I'd love to take 5 minutes, clock back on, and make my wage. The fact that I had to sit down for 30 was ridiculous. I just want my gas money. So I was asked if we've asked. Now I have, not only today, but I asked on Sunday. This is a free market approach. If a business does not offer all employees breaks with the now hiring signs everywhere, you're going to go to the place next door. So those are facts. One more fact. This law does not exist in Mississippi. There's no mandate in these states for a minor team member to sit down and be forced to take that 30-minute break. Mississippi, Texas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Missouri, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, Arkansas. If this was such the media narrative, you'd think there'd be outcry in those states to put this law into place. But I don't see that happening. Another fact, this legislation simply seeks to allow a 16 or 17-year-old to decide if they want to clock back in to earn their wage. Currently, as the law reads, more facts. Sorry, we don't like facts. Number one, as in the law, no minor shall be employed, permitted, or suffered to work any 5-hour period without one interval of at least 30 minutes within. But then it goes on to say such intervals shall not be included and cannot be included as part of the working hours of the day. And this interval needs to be 30 minutes. So at this point in the game, the state is determining automatically that on a 5-hour shift, as a minor, you will forfeit 10% of your potential salary. Before we start, 10%'s gone. The state is not the person that should be making a decision. For a part-time job at Subway or at Andy's Ice Cream or anywhere else I've heard people tell me they work, that's a parent's job to determine. Another fact, the parents are in control. Because if you want to go further into the law, in order to become employed at 16 or 17, you must gain a parental signed work permit. Again, the narrative and the facts just don't line up, but that's okay. We'll keep on with the facts. Currently, the state, at the cost of clocking out, is playing babysitter for the team member. What do I mean by that? The only way for the state to verify that their babysitting service for the 16 and 17-year-olds is in effect is to force them to clock out. Then if they make a mistake, the law states that if a minor fails to clock in or out for a mandated work period and the time edit is necessary, now in 2024, since this is a 1976 law, the time edit shall be documented and acknowledged in writing by the minor and the manager. So now we got to go chase, if you're a manager, you got to go chase the team member down to get a signature on a piece of paper in 2024. So the obsolete nature is just absurd. Again, let's go back to parents being in control. We're trying to repeal a current law that mandates minors to take a break, and in my opinion, put the parent in charge. Currently in this state, at 16 years old, you can drive a vehicle, you can marry, you can emancipate, and quite frankly, when I look through the list of prohibited work environments, you can actually work on a vessel on the river with parental approval. So why not just make it easy to let the parent who signs the work permit in the case of making a sandwich at Subway, which is a lot lesser of an issue than working on a river vessel? Bottom line, I think a lot of us, myself included, I came here to create jobs and increase wages. Regardless of the word salad, drama, and narrative that you've seen on the news and in the newspaper, don't let it scare you. This law is legit to what we're trying to do in the state. This will remove obstacles and burdens from businesses. I already mentioned to you this whole paperwork tracking if they don't take a break. Half the places I went on Sunday, the shift manager or the manager on duty said, "Nah, we don't hire anybody who's 16 or 17. And they cited this exact reason. So, removing obstacles and burdens from business, right now businesses see it as a disincentive to hire 16 and 17-year-olds. Many do not. That would increase hiring in our state. It would also increase wages because now instead of these individuals having to sit down and clock out, they can choose to take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes, or in the case of, again, one of the pages in this building today said specifically, I'm allowed to take an hour-long break every day here, but I'd prefer to get paid. So I eat before I come. Seriously? I don't know the difference between 18 and 17 and 11 and a half months, but again, so it also increases the state's workforce. When you have the chance to start working at 16, you develop leadership, cooperation, initiative. You develop a ton of personal characteristic traits that will help you when you go into your career. You start at 18 versus someone who starts at 16, you've got 2 less years of building that skill set. So, I think I've answered most of all the questions. The only other thing I'll say is that Louisiana needs to create jobs, raise wages, and remove counterproductive obstacles and regulations, and repealing a 47-year-old law does exactly that. I think I've answered all the questions that I've heard so far, but if they have any more, Mr. Speaker, I'll be glad to take them.
I thought you were trying to filibuster your own bill.
Nope. I'm trying to get done with questions, sir.
Rep.
I'm
Willard.
answering them ahead.
Well, Rep. Willard for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep. Wilder, are you bringing this bill to help kids that work, or are you trying to help businesses?
It's a great question, Rep. Willard. It's to help kids, and I'll explain why. If 2 individuals at any business work 4 to 9:30, that's 2 5.5-hour shifts. That's 11 hours. The current law forces them to clock out for a half an hour each, which means the business has the opportunity to pay only 10 hours. Every business I've spoken to would gladly pay 11. So the profit over people narrative doesn't work. And if that's not where you're going, I'm just,
Yeah, that's not where I was going.
hey, thank you.
So you don't think that providing kids, because the law says a 20-minute break will suffice, right? You're not violating the law for 20 minutes?
The law has been amended so many times to pacify the ability for this mandate to stay on, fine businesses, and create burdensome paperwork. So yeah, it could be 20 minutes, but if it's 21, now we're in violation. If it's 19, it's so arbitrary and all.
Well, 21, you wouldn't be in violation. It says it has to be 20 minutes.
Okay, well then I'll give you that. But if they want to take a 10-minute break and clock back on, they can't do that.
So do you think that it's too much to ask to give a minor a 20-minute break if they're working a 5.5-hour shift or longer shift?
I absolutely do not think it's too much to ask. And again, every single business owner I called, I know hundreds of them. I only got in touch with a number of them, a couple dozen out of the 100. Every handbook offers all team members a break, all adults alike. I think the concern for me is the state is playing nanny state and saying you have to. And as a parent, if I interject and say I don't want my 16-year-old to have to take a break, the law prevents me from interjecting. Those who show up to work today, Rep. Willard, the few that show up after 10 interviews to get 2 to show up, if you ask them to tuck their shirt in with a crooked face, they'll quit. They'll walk out. So what's going on right now is the workforce that shows up in 2024 is absolutely different than the workforce that would show up in the 70s and 80s and even in the 90s. It's completely, so those who show up, they want their gas money, they want their cell phone bill, they want to work. But I absolutely agree with you. And I'll say in my companies, multiple, every person is offered a break. Only 16 and 17-year-olds, we have to argue and force them to sit down and take that break.
Does this bill only deal with 16 and 17-year-olds?
To my knowledge,
Okay. At what age can you get a work permit in Louisiana?
I believe you can get a work permit at 14, but the restrictions on 14 and 15-year-old employment is so egregious. If you try to navigate it, you're going to be, it's almost like, oh, you hired a 15-year-old, I'm going to come get you because you can't navigate 2-hour shifts. I think it's 3 hours on a weekend, and I tried that once, and the parents are like, I got to drive my kid 30 minutes to work. Why would I drive 30 home and pay the gas money of their wage?
So 14 and 15-year-olds would not hit that 5.5-hour threshold, is what you're saying?
They can't by law, and
Okay.
quite frankly, due to the complication of the laws, no one I know hires 14 and 15-year-olds.
I mean, I worked as a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old in the state of Louisiana, and I know people in my family that do as well. So
Yeah, I just have to know what I know.
Yeah, so I do know. So what is the main issue that you're trying to deal here? Are you suggesting that we can fix workforce shortage issues by hiring 16 and 17-year-olds and taking away their lunch break?
No, and again, I go back to the taking away the lunch break is a false narrative, which I don't.
Taking away their 20-minute break?
No, I'm trying to remove a mandate. This law simply seeks to allow that age group to determine for themselves with their parents. I think this law, to answer your question, is going to be a piece of how to fix our workforce commission. As an example, and again, this may not resonate with you or anybody else's personal examples, but in the past 25 years that I've been in a business that hires teenagers, I've had more people that we've hired at 16 that have actually made it to a point where they can go to our national franchise conference and take their store and go walk on a stage and win awards when they're 21 and 22. And I attribute a lot of that to their development when they were 16, when they were 17, to get ahead of that. So for me, it's a small piece of how to actually increase employment and increase workforce development.
Did those people who are now 21, 22 getting those awards, did they get a 20-minute break?
Well, they got their mandated 30-minute break
Okay,
because it was law and we follow the law.
okay.
Otherwise, you get fined $500 per occurrence by the Friendly Workforce Commission.
So if this bill were to pass, does that mean the businesses in Louisiana would no longer have to provide that break?
I imagine so. It's not a law to forcibly make anybody take a break in any of the states I mentioned.
Okay. Is there any other law that would relate to a longer duration of work? Like what if the person works an 8-hour day?
Well, the current law as
The
it
minor.
reads, well, no, the current law as it reads is 30 minutes after 5 hours and an additional 30 minutes after 9 hours. But I'm glad you brought that up because in our high schools across the state, both private and public, nobody in this chamber has a problem with 13 and 14-year-olds who are freshmen going to school for a 7.5-hour day. I have 14 schools listed here, and I stopped, that offer a 21, 22, or 25-minute lunch. 7.5 hours in a school setting, and we give a 21-minute lunch break. Then that 13 or 14-year-old student, if they play sports, Rep. Willard, have to scurry out to a baseball or football field for another 3 hours. So to your point, the schools are certainly violating that second break as current, and I'd argue when a student wants a 30-minute lunch break at school, they run the risk of being tardy and getting a detention if they choose that. There's no one to defend them there. If they decide they want the second one before practice, they're thrown off the team. So in our public and private schools, there's far less outcry for what is actually going on when the businesses I know all offer this break.
Are those 20-something minute lunch breaks, do those include recess?
I don't think high school has recess, Rep. Willard. At least mine didn't.
Okay. Last question. So you said at the beginning that this bill is to help the kids.
It's how it helps both. It's wages for minor team members.
It doesn't increase their wages. It just allows them to get paid for the time they would be taking a break.
I would argue a bigger paycheck is an increased wage. We can go with it both ways. Yes, sir.
It's not a bigger wage, though.
Paycheck, sir.
Bigger paycheck because they're not getting paid for a break. Do you have any kids that came to show up and say, we don't want this mandated break anymore?
No, like I told you, I literally walked this place over the last couple of weeks talking to the Pages, who are the exact age plus 1 year we're talking about here. And when it came across, I've received so many phone calls from people in their 30s going, hey, man, why couldn't you fix this 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I lost all that time off the clock?
I just wanted to know, since you claim to do this for kids, if any kids were telling you, we want this bill, we like this bill, but it sounds like you did it on your own. Thank you.
Excuse me, I didn't do it on my own. Short of asking them, if any Page in this house would like to raise your hand in support of the bill, do so. If you don't want to, you don't have to put yourself on the spot. But I told them I don't expect them to say anything. But I can assure you, under perjury, that I've spoken at least 4 Pages in this place that just told me. The cameras will show you where I went before my bill. There are the minors, they don't want this.
All right, so the member's out of time.
I don't
Is there
see
an
any
objection?
hands raised.
I don't want to put them on.
The member's out of time. Is there an objection to granting an additional 5 minutes? Hear no objections. The member has an additional 5 minutes. Representative Freiberg for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, Representative Wilder, is we've gotten some floor notes that are opposed, but how did the LRA or the Small Business Association take a stand on this bill one way or the other?
The LRA is in support, Lobby is in support, and every minor I've talked to is in support.
They turned in cards in committee because I haven't gotten them on the floor, I don't think.
I think that based on the discussion I had with them, they asked that earlier. I texted, I said, do y'all have floor notes? And they said, you need them?
But they turned them in committee?
I believe so, yeah. I believe in the committee there were a couple of dozen red cards, and after our dialogue in committee, they all waved to sit down and speak, and there were over a dozen
So the
green cards.
LRA is in support and the Small Business Association is in support? Thank you.
Thank you.
Rep. Taylor for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is, do you know that the Louisiana Workforce Commission has rules with reference to their employees having to take breaks in the morning and to take lunch breaks?
The actual Workforce Commission?
Yes.
I was not aware of that, no ma'am.
Okay, can you ascertain and look at that to make a determination as to why we would do it for adults and we wouldn't apply the same thing to children, that they're entitled to breaks after a time frame? Would you consider tabling your bill until you can check with Louisiana Workforce Commission and see the rules that they have that afford the same opportunity to adults, whereby in this bill, you don't want to afford it to children? And I think it's mandatory. Have you checked with the Louisiana Workforce Commission?
I have, and Ms. Susie Schoen actually endorses this bill. She's the secretary in charge of the Workforce Commission. So
Okay,
I
do
did
you
talk
know
to
what
her.
the rules are that apply to, would you try to find out what the exact rules are? I've been gone a long time, so I don't know what the rules are now, but I do know they had rules in place with reference to after so many hours, an employee had to take a break, and then they had to take a lunch break, and they pronounced the term, the limit of how much time they would take for these breaks. So I don't see how you can justify not doing it for children and we doing it for adults.
I think the facts I stated justify. Rep. Taylor, I understand where you're coming from, but that's a state agency. These businesses are private entities.
Okay,
And I think like I said, there are 11 other states that do not have these laws in place. There are no minors being harmed. There is no call to action to put these laws back on the book. I would argue if this law was not on the books today, no one would bring this law to put it on the books.
So it's not germane what the state who's about to implement this law, what they do for their employees is not germane to what happens to children.
Apparently, we won't agree, no ma'am.
Thank you.
Rep. Bayham for a question on the bill.
Representative Wilder, let me preface my question by congratulating you on getting Hillary Clinton to condemn your bill on Twitter. It is certain to pass now. My question is this: have any of your employees have stated that if this law passes, if this bill passes into law, that they would quit or leave their job because they would lose their break, their lunch break?
No, quite the contrary. Very few of my employees actually know about this, but the managers that do said that they are just ecstatic, the ones in their stores that know about it. Because, again, the people that show up to work, they want to earn their hourly rate. They don't want to sit on the clock and not. So I would argue that my team and anybody else that works in these establishments, again, I've spoken to not one person. On Sunday, I went to Taco Bell. A young man who I coached in soccer was the manager. He's in his 20s now, and I was blown away. I asked him about this. He was like, oh, that's the dumbest thing ever. He had a 16-year-old team member working. I asked if I could talk to him. Told him the truth. I said, I work for the state, and I have a question about the breaks. The young man looked at me and said, yeah, they make me go sit there for 30 minutes. It takes me 5 minutes to eat my tacos, and I want to come back to work, but I have to sit there and play on my phone. I asked him, would you prefer to go back to work? He said, yeah, I have bills to pay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Rep. Phelps for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, you mentioned there were 11 states that do not have this law. So is it not concerning that that's not even half of the number of states in our country that do not agree with that?
It's not concerning, no, ma'am. I stopped looking when I got that many states that fast.
Well, that's about it. I'm sitting here looking at them, and over a majority, over 25, do have this law in consideration for
Well, thank
for,
you.
for children.
That's their prerogative, yes, ma'am. I didn't check, though. I stopped when I got to that many.
Well, it looked like you just periodically checked the southern region. You didn't just go through this list because they have them all in alphabetical order.
I figured that checking the states that are around us would probably be more geographically sound to everything going on in
Yeah.
this part of the country.
Right. What about Florida?
Florida actually is working on it. They have a minor break law, and they have legislation that they're pushing right now. I'm not sure the depth of their legislation, but I looked up, and they have a piece moving to address something in their minors. I'm not sure what.
Oh, but it is in place right now.
Yeah, I didn't name Florida. Florida has a mandated break in place.
I know you did not name them. I just asked you about them. We mentioned Florida a lot. I just was wondering if you did know that they have one. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the member's out of time. Is there any objections to granting an additional 5 minutes? I need to hear an objection if you're objecting. Hearing no, okay. Someone object. For those in favor of granting an additional 5 minutes, vote yea. Those opposed, vote nay. Madam Clerk, please open machines. Members, vote your machines. Members, Wilder, no. Green, yea. The clerk will close the machine. With 42 yeas, 50 nays, and the motion fails. Rep. Phelps for the floor on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just rise because there was a lot of emails to my office about this, and it really just seems like a common sense thing to continue to be on. I'm concerned about children, which we call minors, and it looks like at this time we're picking and choosing when we want to use the rhetoric and the words that 16 and 17s are young adults, and actually we know that they're not when they need parental permission to work. Again, with everything else that's going on in our state, I think these things were in place basically for simple things as parents, which I think most of us may have done this. Your children are not even mature enough to make decisions of knowing when they need a break, especially toddlers when we talk about when they're sleepy and they don't know it. When we talk about parental skills to our teenagers, about safety and wanting to be with their friends and certain people that they are not aware of until they are age matured. I immediately listened and I heard, I think my antennas went up when there was reference to the pages that are here in this room. I don't know if there was a conversation with them or not, but at the end of the day, I don't know if that was a good gesture or not, Representative. So I stand before you when we talk about the rules that were in place for them to have rest time of going to school. I don't know if you're addressing the work time, if they can't work after 11. I don't know what the motive is. But it's quite concerning when I heard a lot about the conversation about removing the burden from the businesses. And I would like for us to continue to look at our children as minors and not necessarily workers. I'm going to refrain from the word that I really want to use because they're children and they're not to be, let me just, I'm going to stop there. If it's businesses that do not want to hire minors, then maybe that's where we should be. Don't hire them. I heard all fast food restaurants, and I told this to children when it was during COVID, and I had a bill about minimum wage workers and tip workers. When you look at your skill set, you're worth more than $2.14. So I hope I'm going to say to the young people when we mention Subway, Burger King, and fast food places, and children that are trying to get a job and actually enhance their work skills, hopefully they'll realize that they're worth more than that, and their parents will allow them not to work for someone where they have to make a decision for a break for the enhancement of a business. We know how this is probably going to go, but I'm going to ask you to think about your own children or children in your family, your nieces and nephews, and this is definitely not a mandated, it was definitely in the interest of child labor laws that could definitely get out of hand. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Ms.
Rep. Brown for the floor on the bill. Members, please hold it down. Take your time, Rep. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm probably going to violate the House rules on this because I have no idea whether I'm supporting the bill or against the bill. Because with the limited debate, I have questions, and in respect to Representative Wilder, I agree with a lot of the things he said at the well. My question remains, okay, I may agree with him that a 16, 17-year-old may want to work 5 hours with taking a break. I could see that happening. But if this bill passes, so now that 16 or 17-year-old could be required to work an 8-hour shift and not get a break. I don't know. And he mentioned someone at the Taco Bell that took 5 minutes to eat their tacos. Well, they took a break. Whether it was 5, 10 minutes, they took a break. So, I'm once again in one of these places where I have questions. I don't necessarily disagree that many minors want to work their shifts without having to take a break. What if you have a situation where a parent wants their child to take a break for a 6-hour shift, which is not unusual for summer jobs? Is that parent now taken out of the loop and saying, well, I can't, and are employers now going to say, we're not going to hire that person if, he wants to take a break? I don't know. I don't know the answer to those questions, and that's why I'm kind of, Mr. Speaker, coming to the well with a little confusion. So, thank you.
Rep. Wilder, you have a right to close. Members, just to let you know, there was 3 people still in the queue for questions.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The word here is mandated. I go back to saying everyone is allowed to take a break. This is a false narrative when you sit back and ask if they're not going to be allowed to take a break. The Pearl River separates Mississippi and Louisiana. You would think that there are businesses that are 1 mile inside Louisiana and 1 mile into Waveland. There's no difference. They're the same thing. If there was a disparity of kids dying or something crazy, that'd be a different story, but that is so false. When you go out to eat, how many times have you gone to Chili's and half the restaurant has tables that are open, but they tell you got to wait for an hour because there's no service staff. There's nobody wanting to work. And the other thing, I use the word young adults, and I'm going to clarify. I coached, and any high school coach that I've ever dealt with has used the word young adults instead of old kids. I treated my children and I treat my team members as capable young adults or pre-adults, pick your word. But at the end of the day, I think that if we want to treat kids like kids, they'll stay kids. If you want to work up and manage them up and treat them with some courtesy and respect to be able to make their own decisions, I think they'll return that back to you tenfold. At the end of the day, this will help create jobs. And again, the disincentive to hire 17 and 16-year-olds is why the obstacles on the business need to be removed, not to make it better for the business. It makes it better to hire the kids. Last thing, everybody in this room has seen news stories, media. The media is working. They're doing their job. They got a lot of people in here scared to hit yes for this. But at the end of the day, vote your conscience. This bill simply wants to increase our workforce, pay teenagers their wages, and it's about facts, not a narrative. I'd ask for your vote. Thank you.
Rep. Wilder moves final passage of the bill. Those in favor vote yea. Those opposed vote nay. Madam Clerk, please open the machines. Members, vote your machines. Mandy Landry, nay. Mandy Landry, nay. Green, nay. Wilder, yea. Laura Vadane, nay. Members, are you through voting? Clerk will close the machine. We have 61 yeas, 37 nays, and the bill finally passes. Rep. Wilder moves to adopt the title, moves to reconsider the votes. We will finally pass. Lay that motion on the table without objection. So ordered. Next bill. Madam Clerk, can you open the machine for co-authors? Members, vote your machine for co-authors. Members, vote your machine for co-authors. Clerk will close the machine. We have 6 co-authors.